Hello, my friends, and welcome back to this episode of Execution Insights, the podcast. Now, today we're stepping into a topic that's hard to see, but it's really easy to feel. Of course, we're talking about loneliness, and not the loneliness of being physically alone. We all know what that's like. Now, today, I'm going to be talking about the kind of loneliness that shows up while you're actually surrounded by people and while you're carrying the weight of decisions and expectations and responsibility and somehow feeling more and more disconnected in the process. So if you're a leader and you've ever felt that, whether it was quietly, privately, maybe even sometimes shamefully, we feel inadequate, I want you to know you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not weak. You're just simply human. And you are most definitely not alone. So today we're going to be talking about something called the loneliness signals, a technique and an idea I use in my coaching with executives all over the world. And we'll be going over what it means and why it matters. But more importantly, we're going to talk about why ignoring it slowly erodes not only our leadership, but our confidence in ourselves. And to stretch that out, perhaps our health, our well-being and our health and our ability to lead our teams. But the most important thing I'm going to share with you today is that there is an antidote to loneliness. You know, in fact, the only real antidote to loneliness is connection, genuine human connection, the kind that you and I build through consistent investments in the people around us. So today we'll be talking about how to reclaim that. And I want to start with a moment from a coaching session I had a few years ago with a really powerful senior leader. In fact, someone whose name you would know if I said it out loud. He was, admired and successful. And he sat across the screen from me looking for some insight to a problem. And here's how he said it. He said, "Jim, I'm leading more people than I've ever led in my entire life, and I've never felt more alone." And as soon as he said that, he sort of looked down at his hands and then he said, "I just don't know what to do." And the worst part of it all is I don't know who I can tell besides you. And you see right there, that's the real issue. Leaders aren't missing people. Leaders are missing connection. Because here's what happens when our leadership goes unexamined. For you and me, our calendar fills up. Our conversations turn into status reports and updates. Our relationships become more and more transactional. And somewhere along the way, the whole world outside of that gets quieter. In fact, I think our inner spark actually gets dimmer. And our sense of meaning kind of thins out. You know what I'm talking about? You start carrying everything alone, not because you have to, but because you and I have forgotten how not to. You see, loneliness in leadership rarely looks dramatic. In fact, most of the time, it just looks like exhaustion. It looks like distance and space between us and everybody else. And I think it looks like the slow fading of joy that once fueled your work, so that if you and I don't address it, it becomes contagious. In fact, I want to promise you this, no matter how good an actor you are, your team can feel it. Your culture reflects it. The air in the room changes because loneliness spreads the same way connection spreads, one interaction at a time. And, today there's something I think we need to say out loud. Loneliness hollows us out from the inside. I know. In fact, it drains the energy that once made us, we were decisive and creative and courageous. We can still remember those times if we try. But the heaviness of loneliness makes every decision feel like it's life or death. It makes every conversation feel kind of flatter, and it makes every challenge feel, frankly, personal. In fact, it doesn't just hurt our leadership, it hurts our health. It hurts our confidence, our resilience. And to finish up this part, here's the hardest aspect. Loneliness convinces us to withdraw in the exact moment when we need connection the most. And when we withdraw, you've done it, I've done it, we stop asking deeper questions. We stop stepping toward the people who could help us. We, in a sense, become self-protective. And that protective instinct only serves to deepen the isolation we were already feeling. But there's an even more important truth, and I want to say it clearly today because leaders overlook this. Loneliness isn't just painful. It's one of the earliest warning signs of burnout. You know, we tend to think of burnout as beginning with exhaustion or frustration. But I want to tell you, I've coached a lot of people in burnout, and those are the later symptoms. The early symptoms are quiet. They're more subtle. They're easier to miss. And in fact, the earliest one of all, I think, is this feeling of loneliness. Because once you start to feel disconnected from the people, well, pretty soon you feel disconnected from the meaning in the work. And when connection slips, I think it's not long before purpose slips. And that's when real burnout starts to form, long before you or I ever feel truly depleted. You see, burnout isn't simply overwork. That's too easy an explanation. Burnout is overwork in isolation. It's carrying the weight without having the support. It's leading others without any ability to be led, or even caring for everyone else's needs while kind of slowly losing the relationships that refill our own. And that's why I think the loneliness signal matters, because it's not just about discomfort, not about your heart saying something is missing. And if you don't reconnect soon, you know, your heart starts to say, I'm going to be shutting down. Because, you know, loneliness is like that dashboard light on the car. It's the early indicator, the system alarm. We don't have to stop everything because it's on, but if we ignore it, we're going to pay a price later. And if we just paid attention to it, we could avoid all the damage that seems to come later. So leaders often ask me, hey, Jim, as my coach, what do I do about loneliness? I understand what you're saying, but what do I do? And my answer is incredibly simple, but I always hope it's meaningful. You reconnect. And I don't mean grand gestures. You don't have to throw a party or have a big meeting or issue a big proclamation. Loneliness goes away through small interactions. As long as they're small, genuine, consistent investments in the people around you, loneliness loses its power. In fact, loneliness begins to fade the moment you start truly reconnecting and knowing the people who are all around you. Like, here's an example. How many of you would say that you know more about a person's performance metrics than you do about them as an individual? Let that sink in just for a minute. How many of us would say, hey, I can vividly remember their last project and how they performed? And truth is, I have no idea about what motivates them deeply or what their deepest wish or aspiration is. You see, when we see them only as a performer and forget they're a person, that's the moment we know we need to rebuild. Now, here's the good news. Connection can be rebuilt one conversation at a time. In fact, for example, today, you could ask someone what they're proud of in their work. You could ask them what they're worried about, or ask them in our culture what's giving them energy or what's quietly draining their energy away. You could even ask about their family, about how they're really doing, or even how you might be able to be helpful to them. You see, when you lead that way, I want to tell you something remarkable happens. When their loneliness fades, your loneliness fades too, because connection always flows both ways. So if you're resonating with this message today, I want to tell you 3 practical ways you can begin right now building connections this week. The first one, slow down. Slow down long enough to see the person behind the performance, right? People come alive when they feel like they're seen, and you can do that today. Second, make one relationship a priority this week and reach out to that person with real curiosity, not a crafted agenda or anything formal. Just get to know them through their kindness, through their perseverance, their honesty with whatever they're bringing to the work, and make sure they know that you're really listening to him. You see, when you can name those kinds of things out loud, people feel known and loneliness starts to slip. These are, in a sense, the leadership essentials because people bring their best to leaders who know them well and, frankly, who connect with them beyond the work itself. So, my friends, if you've been feeling the loneliness signal and you're like my coaching client, you didn't know who to tell and you maybe were a little bit afraid of anyone finding out. Remember that loneliness doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're feeling something. You're feeling something that's true, something human, something your heart is calling you back to. And that's connection. Because leadership was never meant to be carried out in isolation, right? Doesn't that make sense? And connection, and by that again, I mean real human connection. Well, it restores everything that loneliness tries to steal. So the challenge for this week that I'm offering is choose one person, have one real conversation, and don't make it about performance. In fact, don't bring up anything about work. Make it about the person. You may be surprised by how much both of you needed this sense of connection that can come after only a few minutes together. So I'm Jim Huling, and this is an episode of Execution Insights, the podcast, and I hope it's been valuable. And if I may, I want to ask you a small favor. If this message spoke to you, would you share it with someone today? It's been my experience that the world is filled with leaders who are quietly lonely and have really no safe place to express that or get some help with it. And you sharing this message today, just saying, hey, check out this podcast, or you might enjoy it, might go a long way to helping someone who's really struggling. And I hope I'll see you on this episode again next week. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you soon.